Hi, welcome to Gruber Power Hour. I'm Janie.
I'm Pete Gruber.
And today we are going to explore and talk about the manufacturers of the UPS equipment and the evolution of them.
Yeah.
Pete's got some great history and knowledge about where they've come from, how they've developed over the years.
And you know what I find interesting? I used AI to do some of this research.
Right.
And I was sharing with Janie that AI doesn't always get it right. And I'd have to ask questions, well, what about Chloride UPS? Because they left them out, right? And suddenly it had all kinds of information for me. So I don't know why it was left out in the first place.
You think it's the key word when you're putting it in, then it knows to search for that?
Most likely, but you would think that when you ask it, give me all of the UPS manufacturers from the last century in the 70s and 80s, it would realize that you really want all of them. You don't just want to select few, and I have to prompt it to give me more, you know?
Right, right. I got you.
The other thing that I noticed is, and I'm feeling really old when this happens, it used to be that, you know, in 40 years of doing this, we didn't have all the expertise. There were a lot of companies out there. And I'm beginning to realize that as I age, a lot of this history is embedded, you know, in my brain somewhere, and it's not readily available.
Well, you know why that is, I believe?
Why?
Because you came from a time before we had all these automated systems where it was so easy to access information. You had to figure it out and find out who are the suppliers that you're going to go to get the equipment. So you had to do, you know, the legwork to find out that information. So that's how it sticks with you. You know, it's like math when you have a calculator instead.
You know, we take so much for granted, but you're right. Before the age of the internet, if you needed information about a company, it wasn't that easy to get. Yeah, you had yellow pages maybe, and or you would call people.
Right,
and,
you call the recorder's office or something.
Or you know, trade magazines, that type of thing. It wasn't as streamlined as it is now. But so in doing the research for this episode, what I wanted to do was talk about the various brands and how they've evolved, and also talk about how critical power or uninterruptible power systems actually came into being and why. In the 60s or so, we had large computers, and they were very popular because companies like banks, large banks, you know, realized that this was a great way to manage versus having a whole bunch of accountants with green shades, you know, with ledgers and handwriting and, you know, or typing and, you know, all of that.
Yeah. I've seen those bits of the old math calculators, like the early calculating machines that they created early on. And they're these huge standing with all the stuff incorporated within it.
And if you go back even further, we have the abacus, which has been around for 1,000 years or more, right?
Got to start somewhere.
Yeah, they were moving pebbles around, I guess, to do counting. But so anyway, we went from large computers, which were unaffordable for most companies. You know, your average doctor, a dentist, a lawyer's office, mortgage company, you know, small local title company. They're not going to be able to afford a large mainframe like an IBM 360. And that was really when I got into the business, was in the mid 70s, when it was nothing but mainframes, large, big computer rooms full of equipment.
I picture the reels.
Yeah. Well, the tape drives, the large washing machine sized disk drives, they were a whole whopping 40 megabytes. These disk drives.
Oh, wow.
They have
oh, my goodness.
three-phase motors in them. They vibrated when the heads were seeking for data, you know, multi-platter.
Loud, I bet.
Yeah. Well, actually, the whole computer room was loud because of fans. And it was like it was like white noise, constant white noise. It wasn't anything like in construction where you have, you know, syncopated pounding or clanging and, you know, things like that.
Okay.
But so we went in the 70s from large mainframes when all the other businesses now realized, oh my God, these are cool tools. What can we do to make them affordable for us? And the companies began to make small PCs. You know, IBM, for example, with the XT.
Right.
And later on the AT. And then, let's see, Digital Equipment had their Rainbow series of computers, which are small, you know, computers, business computers. And we began to shift away from large mainframes to distributed processing. which meant that people were now having computing power at their desktops.
Oh, I remember the very square box that we had sitting on our desk. Yes.
Right? And then along with that, as computing or the needs for more computing power occurred, these desktop computers were eventually networked together through Novell, for example, GNet type networks, where you had coaxial cables connecting the PCs on the desktops together.
I remember way back in the day when we first started networking our computers together in our office at a mortgage company many moons ago. And I was fascinated at the time about how we were connecting all of them together at the main system. Yeah.
And so for a brief time, there was a belief that large mainframes were going away, the need for large data centers were going away, and that people were just going to have computing power at their desktops.
Right.
Well, that didn't last long, that notion, because then they realized, well, you know, the computing demands at the desktop are increasing exponentially. We really need some way to manage those types of networks. And servers came along, which were now clustered into cabinets, which now began to look a lot like mainframes in that you had a large power requirement for multiple servers inside cabinets, eventually in computer rooms again. So the whole notion of computer rooms going away never really materialized because the server farms or the servers began to take over.
Oh, I remember those days.
So during this time now, the need for uninterruptible power, of course, continued to increase. Uptime is everything, right? And we went from power conditioners in the late 70s, which were more popular than UPSs because UPSs were very expensive at the time, to we then migrated from power conditioners to UPSs in these computer rooms and these data centers. And that's when a lot of these manufacturers began to create product. Some of the UPS manufacturers started as battery manufacturers. Two of the most notable are Chloride and also 𝙎𝙬𝙘𝙀. And they saw that their product was being put into cabinets or into racks to feed critical power, to feed UPSs.
So it only made sense that they went over that direction.
Right. So I thought what we could do is touch on the migration of the major UPS manufacturers in the U.S. at least. And one of the most notable was APC, American Power Conversion. They were founded in 1981, and they really started with small UPSs. They were kind of like Triplite and Minuteman. They weren't making large three-phase boxes.
Okay.
And then eventually, of course, went into three-phase UPSs and became very popular. They also pioneered something else that revolutionized the industry, which is scalable UPSs.
Yes.
Prior to that time, the Lieberts and the Emersons and the 𝙎𝙬𝙘𝙀s were making UPSs one size. So if you had a 200 kVA requirement, you would buy a 250 or 500 kVA UPS. But then as you exceeded that capacity, you now had to buy another unit.
Okay.
Whereas APC saw the writing on the wall and said, why don't we make modular, scalable UPSs with power modules? And then he started with the Symetra single phase, which is a 4 kVA power module, which goes up to 16 kVA. So you start at 4, 8, 12, 16. Then they went into the three-phase world and they had 10 kVA power modules to do the same building block approach. You could actually grow your UPS capability along with your business growth. And you didn't have to swap out the entire system.
Makes sense. Market demand is what drove them. Yeah.
And then eventually they went to the 25 kVA power modules. Now we're getting up into the 500, even to 1,000, kVA UPS sizes. Of course, when there's a successful idea like this, the other UPS manufacturers quickly followed suit and also started to make scalable UPSs. The other one that was that is notable is Liebert Corporation. Well, Liebert actually started as a computer room AC manufacturer.
Now that's interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Founded in 1965, actually.
Okay.
And they were making computer room AC units which are a bit different than your normal building AC for people comfort, because at that time they had removable disk drives, and static electricity was a big concern in computer rooms. So you needed humidity control,
Okay.
both to remove it and to insert it. The optimum range for a mainframe computer with the type of disk drives, a large floor standing, because they open those up, is 40 to 60% relative humidity.
Oh,
Well,
wow, that seems high.
yeah.
Yeah.
In most places, you're not going to get that. In Phoenix, Arizona, we're in the
Definitely not.
single-digit humidity levels
Right.
outside, right? So what they made was a crack unit, computer room AC unit, that was actually able to not only cool, but also insert humidity control. And the third important element was filtering. Now, it had to be near clean room levels, because when you have a large washing machine disk drive that you open and close in order to insert platters that have heads flying above these platters within the micron level, very close to the head. Any piece of dust looks like a gigantic piece of gravel. And if that ever attaches itself to the head while that disk is spinning at 3,000 RPMs or whatever,
Right.
you then crash your heads on your disk drives.
Oh, wow.
So filtering
piece of
became
dust.
important, yeah. And what 𝙤𝙗𝙗 was making was those three components, and including filtration with S-pleated 5-micron filters.
Okay.
Eventually, they decided we need to get in the power business as well, because UPSs are very popular and they're starting to grow. Then we have Merlin-Geron, MGE, which was founded in France. Actually, it was founded by Paul Merlin, there we go, and Gaston Gerin, a couple of Frenchmen. And they actually started in the 1920s, and they were making circuit breakers originally.
Oh, wow.
And then Merlin-Geron, because it's too hard for us to pronounce here in the United States, became MGE, which
more
stands
sense.
for Merlin-Geron, and the E, I don't know, Enterprise or whatever. So that was a big player. And then we had Best Power Technology. Best Power Technology really created a new level of innovation in how UPS manufacturers went to market.
Okay.
Before the age of the internet, the way that a manufacturer went to market was typically through manufacturers' representatives, because they didn't have sales staffs. And these reps were responsible for territory, and they ended up basically controlling that territory and representing that particular brand or that manufacturer's products.
Okay.
Best Power Technology upset the apple cart. They were too small to attract good manufacturers' reps, because they were all taken by Liebert and Emerson and I don't think APC at the time, but there were others.
Right.
And so in order for them to rise and become successful quickly, they decided to break that business model completely and sell direct with tiered pricing. When you sell direct, you have a free-for-all. In other words, the end users are getting the same price as the resellers. Well, that doesn't work, because the resellers need margin to survive.
Of course.
So they need reseller discounts. So what Best did was they had their tiered pricing, but they went a step further. They based that tiered pricing, those discounts, on sales volume.
Absolutely.
Which now motivated
Yes.
the resellers to sell only their equipment to build up their volume so that they get the best
their
discount.
costs low.
Right.
Yes.
That again revolutionized the UPS industry. What I find in the critical power industry, it is a very slow-moving, business, unlike others which rapidly adopt new technologies.
Right. People seem to stick with what they got rather than go into the new.
Yeah, batteries is a prime example. In the critical power world, they're still using lead-acid batteries predominantly, versus the lithium-ion that the other, industries that need DC storage are using, like the EV market.
I think the news scares them.
Yeah, that could be. So then we've got three Japanese companies that came along: Mitsubishi Electric, Toshiba, and Triad UPS. And you know, the Japanese at the time were already taking over the electronics audio market. We had
Oh,
RCA,
yeah.
GE, we had Zenith, and these were hand
Yes.
wired, and they were proud of it. Japanese came in with Nakamichi, with Kenwood, with Sony, with audio equipment that was
Reminds me of the
substantially.
Radio Shack days.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Well, they applied that same level of innovation that they did with the audio world, sleeker designs, newer technologies, and smaller footprints, to the UPS world. And they
Oh, yeah.
had some top-notch product. Triad UPS, for example, one of the Japanese manufacturers, created a revolution in that instead of using SCRs in the inverters to create a step wave function to create a sine wave, they were able to use large IGBT transistors,
Okay.
which don't need step wave. You don't need multiple SCRs. You need one large transistor. You feed a small sine wave into that, and it amplifies the heck out of it.
Nice. Okay.
So they had a smaller footprint, they had a better technology, and they had a lower cost.
There you go.
Deltec was another UPS manufacturer in San Diego. We were a rep for a while. I remember going to their factory at least a couple of times. They were eventually acquired by 𝙭𝙗𝙗, and then 𝙭𝙗𝙗, there's a whole trajectory there, how many times they went through acquisitions as well.
Right.
All right.
Where did they end up at, 𝙭𝙗𝙗?
Eaton.
Eaton. Okay.
Eaton
There we go.
Powerware, you know.
Yeah. Yep.
Again, 𝙭𝙗𝙗𝙗 was a company that started in the battery business. They weren't making UPSs initially. They were making great batteries.
Okay.
And eventually recognized, you know, where are batteries going? Well, they're going into UPSs.
Yes.
In their transformation, yeah, they came from, and I'll have all of the companies that they migrated to here. See if I can find that here. I'll give you all of
I
their
know there's a whole
trajectory.
list of them you started rattling earlier.
Yeah. So at one point, 𝙭𝙗𝙗𝙗 Battery Systems acquired General Battery Corporation and Deltec, the one in San Diego.
Right.
That got them into UPSs. From there, they were known for their batteries still, but they went through several ownership changes at that point. And then 𝙭𝙗𝙗𝙗 eventually became Invensys in the late 1990s. Eventually Invensys sold out to Eaton with their Powerware series of UPSs, which is where they currently are,
Right.
that brand.
Oh, yes. We're very familiar with them that way.
Yeah. All right. The other manufacturers that had a migration, Merlin-Geron, remember the French company that was making circuit breakers in the 1920s, eventually got into uninterruptible power. They were one of the first ones that actually went global. A lot of these other manufacturers I mentioned tended to confine themselves to the U.S.
Is it just based on market demand?
You know, I would say, if I had to guess why they were doing it, it takes a lot of additional infrastructure to go global. You have regulatory requirements, like in the auto world.
Okay.
You know,
right. They have restrictions on what can and cannot operate within their area.
Yeah. The latest one is everybody loves a Cybertruck. But guess what? Europe doesn't love it yet because they have all these regulatory things they want to change about it.
So it meets, the guidelines.
One of the silliest things, silly but life-saving, I suppose, is that there's a crush spec that has to be on a hood of a vehicle in Europe. In case you're driving along and you hit someone on a bicycle and they flop down onto your hood, it doesn't do as much damage.
That's bizarre to me.
Well, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense because in Europe, you have a whole lot more people bicycling than you do in the United States, right? So I'm sure the Cybertruck is falling under that regulatory requirement. But so to get back to the question, why didn't the UPS manufacturers go global?
Right.
Well, unless they already were, like the Japanese, for example, who came to the U.S. and they were able to sell in, Asia. It was difficult for the U.S. manufacturers to meet all the regulatory requirements. And then they, of course, have language issues. You remember the Ford Pinto going to South America, and suddenly people realize that's a cuss word over there. Why don't you name your car that? You know?
I didn't know that. It was?
Yeah. In Spanish, for those of you that are going to chime in here, tell us maybe perhaps what that is if it's not too...
We'll put that in.
Yeah. So 𝙤𝙤𝙘𝙠, which became MGE because we have a hard time pronouncing 𝙤𝙤𝙘𝙀 or 𝙤𝙤𝙘𝙀.
Okay.
They eventually were integrated into Schneider Electric.
Which we're very familiar with. Yes, indeed.
And there's an interesting story there, too. You know, companies like Schneider Electric, which are large conglomerates, eventually look at these types of companies and say, would an acquisition of this type round out our product offering? Since we already sell circuit breakers, we already sell whatever goes with a UPS, batteries or whatever.
A turnkey type of solution for the customer.
Right. So MGE was integrated into Schneider Electric, and sometimes there's a lot of merging that takes place because APC is also part of Schneider. So now you have two competitors that suddenly have to play nice under the same umbrella, right?
Yes.
One of the earliest examples of that, for us at least, that affected us was we were a Deltec UPS rep, and that was a company in San Diego. Smaller but great product. And as a rep, of course, we had a territory. We had the state of Arizona, one of our first rep, type agreements that we had. When they merged with 𝙎𝙬𝙘𝙀, suddenly we were faced with the fact that 𝙎𝙬𝙀 also has a rep organization selling UPSs.
So you've got that conflict.
So we now, the decision that this new corporate entity had to make is, which rep do we like the most? A or B, right?
Who generates the most revenue.
Exactly. We ended up losing, we lost Deltec because we were smaller than the 𝙎𝙬𝙀 rep that had been in place here for, a decade or more and had built up more business than we had.
Sure, okay. So, well, that stinks, and they took those customers with them at the time, huh?
Well, yes, and we scrambled then and attempted to find a replacement, and fortunately... Best Power Technology came along, and we were able to build a strong business with them. In fact, there were two top resellers for Best Power Technology, and this is in the late 80s or so.
Okay.
One of them was a company that had the McDonald's franchise, and every point of sale equipment, every cash register.
That would have been huge.
Had to have a UPS on it. So they were selling tens of thousands of small Best Power UPSs for the cash registers.
That's fantastic, right?
So they had the most volume. We, on the other hand, were in the data center space, in the computer room space.
Okay.
And we were the largest at the time. Their biggest discount was actually 30% off of retail.
Okay.
And you had to, jump through hoops to get there and do lots of sales. So one of the owners of Best Power Technology, and this is an interesting story, Marguerite Paul was her name. She was the mom, and she had 4 sons in the company. One was engineer, one was marketing and, HR, that type of thing. And they had built their company around this core of family members.
Okay.
Became very successful with this new way of going to market. Instead of reps, let's incentivize the resellers.
To buy. Yes.
Well, we were trying to insert ourselves between their smaller resellers, the ones at 15%, and ourselves at 30%. And it wasn't quite enough, that 15% margin. And the reason I say we're trying to insert ourselves, there were certain smaller resellers that Best Power Technology wasn't interested in setting up or selling to because they didn't qualify for terms, they didn't have enough financial wherewithal, and we, on the other hand, would sell to them at their 15%.
Oh, okay, right.
So I knew that in order to continue to grow that channel, which is the discarded resellers that Best wasn't interested in, we needed an extra 5 points. So I talked to Marguerite. I talked to her for months. She says, all right, do this. Fly out here, make that commitment, come see me and my sons, and we'll see what we can do. So this was like end of November, and they're in the Four Seasons area, Necedah, Wisconsin. And
Okay.
I wasn't used to snow because I lived out here for 20 years at that point. But anyway,
Oh, yeah.
I did my thing. I flew out there. It was cold as heck, I remember.
Did you
And
slip and slide on the sidewalks?
well, that too. And the fact that they were out in the country meant that there wasn't really any hotel, motel
Oh,
infrastructure.
right.
So I remember staying in this seedy little strip mall motel actually, outside of Necedah, Wisconsin, in one of the farm rural, areas. And the blanket that they gave me was about that thick. And I froze all night long,
Oh,
shivering, and put my clothes from my
You worked
luggage on
for it.
top of me. Oh, I worked for it. So then I get out to the factory, very impressed with their operations, got to know the family, got to know the members. And during my trip there, I did not get the green light for that 35%. And I thought,
Felt defeated.
totally defeated. To make matters worse, it was cold as heck, but a rainstorm was coming through now, and I had to make my way back to Madison, Wisconsin to the airport.
Right.
And by the time I got to the airport, it was raining so hard I could barely see out the windshield. It was cold as heck. It was probably in the low 30s
geez.
with that kind of rainstorm, and I'm not dressed for it. I had a suit,
Right.
and
It'd be miserable.
It was one of the few suits I own with a jacket. So I had to get from the rental car to the airport, and by the time I got there, I had to walk through this rain, and I was soaked to the limbs, freezing, sitting there waiting for my plane, dejected, thinking,
Right.
this was a wasted trip. I don't know why I did it. I'm getting down on myself. And suddenly I hear a page, Pete Gruber, come to the front desk or something, right? So I go to the front desk. What happened? Did my family,
No cell phones, right?
no cell phone.
That's
no,
right.
No,
No cell
absolutely not.
phones.
This was 1987,
Exactly.
88 at best, right? Well, anyway, I get on the phone, and it's Marguerite Paul. And she says, I wanted you to know before you came back home that we have decided to give you that 35%.
Hallelujah. Yeah. Nice. It made it all worth it. That story epitomizes to me the lengths that we will go through for our customers as well.
Yes.
When we go out and we'll go on site and we will do the same thing for our customers, going to visit with them and going to meet them and build our relationships.
Right.
That's similar to that, that.
There's a book I read, I think prior to that trip, about go-getters.
Right.
And like you said, it's that pervasiveness. It's that go-getter attitude
Right.
that eventually gets you what you want and you have success. So for those of you watching out there,
We got stuff coming in.
if there's a philosophical component to this podcast, that's it.
There you go.
Don't give up.
Well, I always say, there are only speed bumps. There are never stop signs.
Yep,
That's
exactly.
my go-to.
And the only time you lose is when you stop trying.
Exactly, indeed. We have comments. YouTube, Tay Fraley, haha, about the swear word moment. You got it. Highlander's here. Great info. Nice to talk to you, Highlander. Certainly have been a lot of electrical consolidations over the last few years. Well, many years, the last 100 years, huh?
Yeah. Acquisitions, it's just the way most companies tend to grow these days.
Right. Last one, Highlander. What's Gruber affected by the latest global software glitch?
Well, yeah, when I came in this morning,
Right.
Jason, we're not receiving any email.
I know, that was the first thing. When I saw it on the news this morning, when I woke up and was watching the news getting ready, I went to my phone and immediately went to my emails to see if I was getting an email. And the first email I had said that it wasn't sending. So that was my immediate, okay, we are affected by it. And so that's why I came right in to check and make sure whether or not we were functioning. But luckily, we're up and running.
Well, actually, one of our social media members was affected by this glitch, too. Aaron,
yeah?
tell us about it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was trying to take the family to their flight this morning at Sky Harbor, Phoenix Sky Harbor. And we got all the way to about I-17 and Camelback. And then Sarah got an alert saying that systems were down and she was being entering a flight delay of about 6 hours.
Wow.
So I think she's going to be entering her flight around 1 p.m. today instead of at 6 a.m. So,
Wow,
yeah,
okay.
definitely feels like it hit a lot of the airports and banks and a few other places too.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So one final company that we didn't touch on very much, Vertiv,
Yes.
𝙤𝙤𝙘𝙀, Emerson, there's a whole saga and story there, and it kind of goes back to Chloride. Chloride is another historic and significant player in the UPS business with a rich history that goes back to the UK.
Okay.
And Chloride was founded in the early 20th century, making battery products.
Okay.
And they had a manufacturing plant not too far from where I grew up in upstate New York, just outside of Rochester, actually, south of there. And they expanded into the UPS business in this last century as well. Eventually, they were acquired by Emerson Electric, and that's when Emerson was still separate from Liebert. And then eventually Emerson and Liebert combined.
Right.
And, you know, in those kinds of acquisitions, you never know who bought who type thing, you know?
Right. Right. They mutually come together.
Yeah, sometimes it's just a friendly merger. But that's what happened to Chloride. And then Liebert ran for a while. By the way, the story on Liebert's kind of interesting. We talked about the fact that they started in '65. They were making computer room AC units in Cleveland, Ohio. And the culture there was kind of unique in that the founder had a couple of sons, and he himself played football. They were football fanatics. And it was funny because in the 80s or so, anybody that you talked to at Liebert was from the played either professional football or college football.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yes.
And they were a very competitive company because of that, playing that sport.
Sure.
They used to run roughshod over the competition. And I have examples of that being in the service business. They were one of the ones that played dirty tricks with parts.
Oh, boo.
Yeah. And, but again,
okay.
it was that highly competitive nature. So that was part of their culture. And eventually, of course, they were acquired again. And then Vertiv is now their name.
Right.
And they are definitely still making UPSs. So.
Well, what's interesting about what we do and who we are is the fact that we have all this broad range of knowledge through you and your experiences, because most other companies that are just dedicated and servicing only one brand or something like, you know, they don't have that broad range of history and understanding of the equipment, where it came from, its abilities, things like that.
And we should probably talk about what is the future of UPS systems. But before I get there, I'm happy that the rep program went away.
Right.
We live in the information age, and the reason that reps were necessary and successful was the manufacturers didn't develop sales organizations. We didn't have CRM programs, for example. And they felt that their mission was to make product. They weren't interested in doing the HR associated with having call centers and having salespeople and all that. So that's where there was a symbiotic relationship with the reps and the manufacturers.
Okay, and the customer service level, I'm sure, was affected as well. Right.
And then what happened? The information age came in. Now, the distance between end user, someone that's going to buy something, and manufacturer just shrunk exponentially.
Right.
You could Google a product, and most companies had websites by that time. And then when they got inquiries, they said, you know what, we're spending all this money on advertising on websites, and these customers are coming to us.
We should help them.
Why do we need reps?
Right.
They didn't bring it to us.
Right,
You know,
indeed. It was direct.
They have competition now. We have websites, we have social media presence, and the customers are coming to us directly.
Right.
So that was the death of manufacturer reps.
Oh, yeah. I could see how, for sure.
So the future of UPS. Well, we talked about this in the last podcast briefly.
Yes.
Energy efficiencies, improving the efficiencies of UPS systems, reducing energy loss during conversion, better technologies, in other words, more innovations in semiconductors, and of course, batteries, DC storage, which is a large part of UPSs in that you have to have somewhere
to have that.
store that DC. And because DC now is coupled to renewable energy with solar and wind energy, incorporating that into backup power systems improves the resilience of the power supply. It also makes UPS integral in the sustainable building aspect.
Absolutely.
In that you no longer need to draw as much power from the utilities because you have your own energy generating capability.
Right, right.
So that's part of the future of uninterruptible power. And then, of course, you have the advancements in the battery technology. We've already replaced, in most industries, lead-acid batteries, except for the UPS business. We're still using lead-acid. So there's a major quantum leap there for the critical power manufacturers is to switch over to lithium-ion batteries and eventually solid-state batteries, graphene-type batteries, something far more efficient that charges faster, weighs less, lasts longer. 4 to 5 times longer. Exactly.
Right.
Now, the modular and scalable design, most of the UPS manufacturers, after APC's foray into that concept, they took off with it as well. Like the 𝙤𝙤𝙘𝙠 products, the Infinity product is a scalable UPS, also 4 kVA power modules.
Right.
So that's what I foresee the future. And eventually, as we talked about in the last podcast, there's no reason that uninterruptible power capability cannot be inserted into the very power supplies that are powering the servers.
Incorporate it into one system.
Yeah, rather than have an external box fed by AC, and then feeding the boxes with more AC and circuit breakers and all that goes with it, and the battery systems.
I could see something like that evolving through these acquisitions that you talk about, and one manufacturer working with another to combine it.
It's all driven by innovation, by great engineering, and thinking outside the box.
Right.
And then, of course, making it profitable. That's the hallmark of being in business.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. That was a wonderful wealth of knowledge and history, and incorporating it into, stuff that you cannot find on AI, by the way.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching, and we will see you next week.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.